Essence, the introduction. What is Essence? It's a flexible thinking framework. And what I mean by that, it's a framework to help you think through the problems you have, ask the right questions to arrive at the solution. So it's not going to give you the answer, but it's going to help you by guiding you with the right questions to ask so you can find the right answer. It can help a team figure out where you are and where you need to go next. And right there you should be thinking, that might be useful. If I know where I am right now and what I should be focusing on next, you can move away the clutter of everything else that might be less important. It can also give you objective information. This is good because if you have to convince a boss or a manager why you want to do this rather than that, you can go to the framework. And our vision is that this framework in years to come will be taught in all universities. And so every software engineering student will come out and know it. And we'll teach it in industry so people will know this is essential. Essence is what we're arguing is this is essential to all software engineering. It's very small, as you're going to see. But it's the things that are essential to small projects, large projects, projects of any size. It'll give you objective information, and I'll explain where you get that from, that'll help you with priority decisions, help you gain the attention on key insights that might otherwise be missed. Some of the early projects that are going on, we've got people teaching Essence in multiple universities now. We have some happening down in Florida Atlantic, down in Boca Raton. We have it happening at Carnegie Mellon West out in San Francisco. And there's students that are doing studies now on using Essence on projects. And one of the things that just recently came back, this paper is going to be published in the next few months, they came back and they said one of the things we really got out of Essence, unlike when we just use Scrum, when you use Scrum, you have a retrospective and the team says, how can we do better? But it doesn't give you any help in figuring out, where you can get better. The team figures out where they need help just from their own experience. What this group said was that Essence helped them ask questions about areas which could be problems, but we didn't know they could be problems. So it's helping you find things that would be missed because you didn't think about it from your own experience. Key elements inside we refer to the kernel. The kernel of Essence are the pieces that are common when I use the word kernel. Key elements inside the kernel are alphas, alpha states, alpha state checklists, and this all probably sounds very foreign, but I'm going to explain it. Also, I will briefly explain activity spaces and competencies. Alphas are the essential things we work with. Now, a common question that we get, why did we pick such a funny name? Why didn't we pick a name that's more reflective of what software engineers already know? Why alpha? And part of the reason, and again I'll explain it with some examples, is we wanted to pick a different name because alphas aren't what you might think they are. Some people think immediately that alphas, well, they're abstract work products. And that's not a good way to think of them. So we picked a different term. Alphas are, and you'll see multiple examples as we go forward. Alphas are essential things we work with. Alphas have states, and they have checklists that help you assess the progress and health of your endeavor and take action early to address real pain points. So, these are the 7 alphas, and I don't know how well you can read that, but I'm going to take a little time on this diagram. There are 7 core alphas inside the kernel. We actually have a deck of cards that you can buy. You can download them from Ivar Jakobsen's website. And with the latest OMG standard, these are being updated. So if someone's really interested in them, you might want to wait till the latest set comes out. But these cards they encapsulate what we're calling the essence of software engineering. And you can do various things with the cards, and I'll talk about this as we go, but you can play games with the cards. Teams can use the cards to help them assess their progress and play other games that help them in their software engineering endeavor. So the first card I have here is actually the same as that slide, and it just shows a few of the alphas. So let me go back and just talk about this at a high level, and then I'll mention a little bit more about the cards. The kernel is broken up into three what we call areas of concern, and that's what you see with the colors. The customer area on top, the solution area, and the endeavor area. So in the customer area, we have two alphas, opportunity and stakeholders. And I'm going to come back and I'll read you some things from the opportunity alpha definition card in a moment and make a point about that. But I got opportunity and stakeholders and customer. Solution, requirements and software system. Endeavor is work, team, and way of working. So we also tried to select terms that were somewhat intuitive, but in some cases they're not at all intuitive. And I'll give you an example. A lot of discussion went on this, which, by the way, if it didn't occur to you, the way this thing all came about, the SEMAT initiative is a community of volunteers. We all volunteered our time. We had working group meetings. This was developed by people around the world, people in industry, people in academia, in industry, research, contributing on working groups. We would have Skype meetings regularly, and this was a community-free effort. So this is going to be open source. Anybody can use it. We've actually CMAT is now becoming a nonprofit organization to help communicate this as we go forward. That just gives you a little bit of the background on where this came from. So we've getting back to my point on, I'm saying the words we intended to be somewhat intuitive. The one that's sort of not intuitive to some people is work, because work was originally project. But when we had discussions, we found out that not all software occurs in the context of a project. There is a lot of organizations that software goes on, but they don't have a project. So we said, well, how can we make this more general? How can we just make it reflect all software? Well, there's always work. Work always happens. Sometimes it happens in the context of a project. But if you're doing software, there's work. So that just gives you an idea how these came from. So let me just give you a few more of this. I'm not going to walk through everything on this because we could spend the whole class just on this chart. But let me pick opportunity. And I'll show you how some things are not as intuitive as you might think. Opportunity, and the cards in here for each of the alphas, for each of those alphas, if you get an alpha card, you get a definition of the alpha, and then you get a listing of the states. And then there's also a card for each of the states. And in each state within an alpha, there's a set of checklist items. Because that gives you the idea of what's in this deck of cards. So opportunity is defined. And this is an example that I'll show where you don't want to think of alphas as just abstract work products. Opportunity is the set of circumstances that makes it appropriate to develop or change a software system. Now, a lot of people, when they first hear the word opportunity, they go, how's that any different than requirements? Requirements exist. All of these alphas exist on every project. They may not be written. We're not saying they're written in a document, but they exist in some form. It might be very tacit. The set of circumstances that make it appropriate to develop or change a software system. How is that different from requirements? The example I like to use, there are projects that have great requirements that get canceled because someone stopped managing the opportunity. Another example I'll read.
So when you read it, I didn't hear requirements. What I heard was defect.
When I read what?
When you read the work
Opportunity.
Sorry, opportunity. change, right?
Let me read it again. Opportunity is the set of circumstances that makes it appropriate to develop or change a software system. So what that is saying, opportunity is, in order for you to build a software system, somebody needs to, or change an existing one, somebody needs to say, we have a need. And somebody's willing to fund the need because it can solve some problem. That's a set of circumstances, right? And we may not even have requirements for it yet. But if you don't have a need, you don't have there's an opportunity. Joe says, I got a problem. If somebody doesn't have that, you don't note that opportunity, and someone doesn't stand up and go, I'm willing to fund it, you'll never have a software system. You're never going to get a team together and go build it because there's no reason, there's no driver. That's what opportunity is about. Is that a little clearer? Okay. So another interesting one, when I'm going to jump to software system. I have another story to tell on this one. Software system is defined as a system made up of software, hardware, and data that provides the primary value by the execution of the software. Now let me read that again, and I'll tell you a little story about this one. A system, again, name of it, software system, a system made up of software, hardware, and data that provides its primary value by the execution of the software. To include hardware in the definition of a software system. It's bizarre. And we kind of used this. We had a lot of discussion. And a lot went into that description. And one of the points I like to make to this is not a theoretical, ideal software engineering model. It is a model to help you be successful in a software endeavor. And I use the word endeavor because we're trying to not use the word project for the reason I mentioned before. How do you become successful in a software endeavor? And the point is, and I'm going to give you more examples of this, because we have got a lot of pushback because there's things in this model that people will go, what does that have to do with software engineering? And we say, well, if you want to be successful, software runs on hardware. And the success of software needs hardware. So you're going to see a lot of things in this model that show dependencies that seem like they have nothing to do with software engineering. I'm going to give another example of that shortly. Another mistake people make when they look at this model is they try to look at it and they say, well, why isn't the team a stakeholder? And this is the mistake of looking at this model and trying to look at it physically and partition your project into these buckets. Don't do that. What this is, another way I like to look at this, think of this as your dashboard in your car. Think of it, these are critical indicators that you want to use to drive your endeavor to be successful. These are things that are it's not a physical partitioning. The team is a very important part of software engineering. It always is. You need a healthy team. You need to be making sure your team stays successful. It is also true that stakeholders are critical on all software engineering endeavors. They're critical. We also want to progress the stakeholders. Are the team members also stakeholders? You bet. So that's not a physical partitioning. Team members are part of the stakeholders. But we're looking at these 7 indicators, and we want to monitor and progress them because we have abstracted out the essentials of successful software endeavors. This is not to say these are the only things you need to be successful. They're common across all. This is a starting point. So large projects is another pushback we get. A large project say, I need more than this. And we go, yeah, we're not trying to say this is all you need. You can add more alphas. You can add more states. You can add more checklists. But what we're trying to say is please don't redefine these. Please don't delete any. You may decide some are less important than other ones, but everyone should be thinking about these because our experience is when projects go awry, you can usually go back to one of these and somewhere find where somebody missed the boat on one of the essentials. Is you can define practices on top of the kernel. There are no practices in the kernel. We are method agnostic. In other words, we're not trying to sell another methodology. We're not in conflict. We're not trying to go out and say, instead of using Scrum or instead of using RUP, you should use Essence. What we're suggesting is that we're complementary to all of them. All right. So, and I'll explain a little bit later how you can actually, you can take any practice you're doing. I actually have a slide on this. You can take any practice your organization is currently using it and represent it using the Essence framework. And I'll explain too why that makes sense, why you would want to do that. So let me give another example of, and I kind of already made this point, but just to give another example of how Essence is different. And that's another thing that I want to do here in the next few slides, explain how our checklists are different. Because another pushback we get is, oh, people have had checklists forever. They use checklists in the CMMI and organizations have them. So how are yours any different? So I want to explain that because there is a difference in our checklists. But first, I'll go back to the example I talked about earlier on the procurement case. If you remember when I said I went into that organization, and we quickly, by asking a few questions, led to the procurement department. And the problem was, we weren't getting the hardware ordered on time. So some people have given that pushback. And they go, well, why would you be talking about procurement of hardware in a software engineering model? This is just one more example. This is one more example to show what we're about is how to be successful on a software endeavor. Not just how to have a pure software engineering model. So if you look at the stakeholders alpha, you see that the definition of it is the people, groups, or organizations who affect or are affected by a software system. A lot of thought went into that. Point being, it isn't just, the stakeholders aren't just the people who are affected, but those who can affect the software system. The hardware procurement can affect the success of a software endeavor. This is an important idea. We are again, I will probably hit this multiple times. This is not a pure software engineering theoretical model. It is a model that is here to help you ask the right questions, to see what's coming, to understand dependencies that can hurt you, that can keep your endeavor from being successful. We're not just looking at software in isolation. Okay, some ways that the checklists are different. Essence, a discriminator of Essence is we don't just have what I call existence checks. The CMMI, I spend a lot of time with companies. That's a big part of my business, is to help organizations increase their CMMI maturity. I know how that works. I'm not bashing the CMMI. I would be bashing a lot of what I do. It's good what they do, but here's a difference. And this is true of many quality departments. They use what I call existence checks. Examples of existence checks are, do I have a plan? And this is what auditors do when they come in. Do you have a plan? Do you have a requirements document? Do you conduct peer reviews? This is what I call existence check. It exists or it doesn't. The problem, it's a nice start, but the problem is with existence checks, they're easy to apply with a yes-no answer. So it's easy for somebody to come in from the outside, but they tend to lead to the checklist mentality, and they don't tell you how well you're doing or how much of something you need to do. Because this gets back to my point, the how much point. So now let me give some examples on how Essence checklists can help taking you beyond existence checks. Here are 4 alphas, and I'm going to talk about 4 of the states in these alphas. I'm going to talk about coherent in requirements, in agreement, in stakeholders, formed in team, and actually this is in the wrong place. It's architecture selected in software system. And I'm just going to show you one checklist item so you get the sense. So if I look at one, checklist item for requirements, alpha coherent state. Conflicting requirements are identified and attended to. If you think about that, that just showing that I have a requirements document is not going to tell me whether the conflicting requirements have been identified and attended to. What that's stating is that somebody has looked at that requirements document to see if there's issues in there, if there's problems in there. And if they have, somebody's working them to make it better. You're now getting at the quality of your requirements. And the reason I bring this up, I'll go back to my point about the developer, don't give me extra stuff unless it's really going to help. The root of many troubled projects for developers comes back to conflicting requirements. How do I implement this? This requirement is ambiguous. So this checklist item is going beyond just an existence check. Now let's look at another one. In agreement, when comments that we came back was, well, this is just not realistic because you're never going to get all the stakeholders to agree. And we said, please read the checklist item. In agreement doesn't mean all the stakeholders are in agreement. What it does mean is, first, we don't have the idea of we have an idea called stakeholder representatives, and the representatives have to represent a community, and then we say the stakeholder representatives agree with how their different priorities and perspectives are being balanced to provide clear direction to the team. You have to read that a few times. What we're saying is we know that we're going to have differing views, but are we working in a healthy fashion? Are these representatives working together, and are we balancing their needs? This ought to be doable because when you have projects that don't succeed, you usually have stakeholders that aren't working together, the stakeholder representatives.
That's a really good definition, guys, from what we've talked about when we talked about the charter and the scope. We've always done kind of yes, no, right? The stakeholders agreed, the stakeholders didn't agree, you moved on. You had a milestone and you moved on.
That's the checklist mentality.
That's exactly how we presented it. That's how we talked about it. But we all know that things change. The charter and the scope, especially the scope, are going to change as the project goes on. And that's a good way of phrasing it, that the stakeholders all have different priorities and perspectives, but they understand the end goal has impact.
Another one, team formed. Team members understand their responsibilities and how they align with their competencies. I could talk for a whole hour on this one. A team is not just a group of people that came together. And I know I only have 15 minutes. Team members understand their responsibilities and how they align with their competencies. If you really think about that, what that's saying is a team is not a perfect team. Okay? But we're transparent. We know where our shortcomings are. And now, by asking that question, the team members can talk together and say, well, you've given me certain responsibilities, but I don't have all the skills to do this. How are we going to solve this as a team? Maybe I can get some help from some else. This leads the team to ask questions to help solve their problems themselves. We just don't say, okay, I got 5 people, that's a team. Root of many troubled projects trace to competency issues that aren't addressed. Doesn't mean you have to have all the competencies, but the team needs to look at it and figure out how they're going to solve the issues if they have some competencies that they're short on. Architecture selected.
Sorry, the last one, are competencies skills?
And the way we've distinguished it, I can be a competent project manager, but skills are at the next level of, I could be a competent programmer, but if I'm not able to program in the language on this project, there's a key skill missing. So competencies are higher than skills. That's the way we've distinguished it. Architecture selected that address agreed to key technical risks. That leads us beyond just saying, does an architecture exist? And the issue here is, the root of many troubled projects can be traceable to we give an architecture demo, but we ignore critical areas. So now we're saying, have we really addressed the critical risk areas? Again, I'm trying to give you that sense where we're going beyond just checklists, leading the team to ask deeper questions, the types of questions that really get to the root of where a lot of software endeavors end up with trouble. Now, this just summarizes that. Essence checklists, because of the way they're worded, lead teams to the deeper analysis that get to the real issues. So they're not checklists that just an external auditor can apply. This model is intended not for an external auditor, but for teams. We're really going after the developer, the practitioner community, not trying to create another system like the CMMI where you have or the ISO where you have external auditors come in. Practices are not in the kernel, but are built as extensions on top of the kernel, as I mentioned. A practice is defined as a repeatable approach to doing something with a specific purpose in mind. Any practice your organization is currently using can be represented in the Essence system. When you represent your practice, Essence brings focus to at least one alpha and at least one of its states. So here's the idea. If you have a practice, one of the problems in a lot of organizations are they have these practices they wrote, but they didn't have any framework to write them by. And sometimes you're being asked to do things and you go, why am I being asked to do that? What's the end game, all right? What's the value? So our whole idea here is you better be progressing at least one alpha, at least one state, or maintaining the health of that state with your practice. Otherwise, ask yourself, why am I doing this practice? Now, there may be a good reason. You may have something else, another alpha you need because of some unique thing on your project, but then define that as an alpha and then know that that's. But this will consciously make you ask questions to make sure your practices are as efficient as they can be. And I've just summed up the next slide. But so here's what the real help for practitioners. And this gets back to the issue when we started, real heavyweight processes. How do we keep away from the heavyweight processes, keep them lean, keep them effective? If you can't find the alpha your practice is helping, Essence leads you to ask, why are we asking people to do this stuff, right? Why are we doing this? Does it make sense? If you find multiple practices addressing the same alpha state, Essence leads you to ask the same question. Why are we doing this? Right? And this happens in a lot of organizations when they move from the traditional waterfall development to Agile. They start doing the Agile practices, the Scrum, but management's still asking us to do all these other reporting things. So this would lead you to ask, if the team is self-managing using a Scrum, why are we being asked to report the same information in multiple ways? If you find gaps, if you find that there is a alpha, like opportunity, that nobody's paying any attention to, Essence will lead you to ask, do we need a better practice here? So you might have a gap in that area. Is this an area? Now, that also leads you to ask, is this an area that's causing the team pain? You don't need to fill a gap just because it's a gap. Maybe it's not that important to your endeavor. Again, the team needs to decide that. The CMMI is an improvement model that can help detect missing practices, but its focus has not been on helping to identify overly heavyweight and redundant practices. This is where it can help. And last I just want you to make you aware of these. I didn't want to talk as much to activity spaces. This is another part of the model. Activity spaces, alphas are the essential things that we work with. Activity spaces are the essential things we do. In order to progress an alpha, in order to make progress, you have to do something. So activity spaces are generic activities or containers for activities. We're not telling you how to do things, but we use these as a framework to help you think about the kinds of activities you should be doing. You don't need to use this. There's been a lot of discussion. Why do I need it? Some organizations prefer to express their practices from an activity viewpoint. I've worked in a lot of companies. Some of them like to write practices results-oriented. just tell their people, do this, I don't care how you get there. Other organizations like to say, you have to follow these certain activities, practices. It's okay, different organizations do this differently. So one of the things we say here is if you want to have an activity view, you can use the activity spaces similarly to the way you use alphas, to help you check whether you are addressing all the right activities. Activities exist whether you describe them or not. So we're not saying you have to define them, but they're there. You're doing something in order to progress alphas. Now, a quick example, I didn't mention this before, but we're developing a user's guide that will become available on the SEMAT website to help people learn how to use Essence. And one of the examples in there, in our scenario 8 out of the user's guide, shows how a team can use the Endeavor activity spaces to work through a disagreement in the state that they're in terms of where are we with the alphas. And so in that scenario, the team has a difference of opinion on where they are with respect to the way of working. They're using Scrum, and one less experienced team member doesn't think that all the key practices that they need have been defined. And as the team talks through this, they come to some revelations. By using the activity spaces, coordinate activities, support the team, track progress, the team in their discussion, they say, okay, what are we doing to coordinate? Well, if we're doing Scrum, we're supposed to be holding these daily stand-ups, but we're not really doing it as well as we should be. And then support the team, the discussion, one of the experienced team members recognizes they should be helping a less experienced team member. And in terms of tracking progress, the team says, we should be updating our burn down charts, but we're not doing it regularly. So the whole discussion in the scenario, you see how the activity spaces just helps the team discuss things. And this is another thing I like to say about this model. It really is a model that, it kind of goes back to an earlier point, that kind of guides your discussion to ask the right questions so that you get to the right decisions. So as a result of this discussion, the team agrees that they have the foundation. They don't need more practices, but they also agree that while they achieved the state of foundation established in way of working, they haven't yet achieved in use because the team isn't really using it the way they expect it to. So now they have to keep working that. So there's also 6 competencies in the model. Competencies are the abilities needed. Each competency has 5 standard levels. And the 6 are identified up here. You see there's one under stakeholder representation under customer, analysis, development, testing under solution, leadership and management under Endeavor. And again, as I've said, these are what we say are essential to all. Just like the alphas, you can add more. You can add more activity spaces. You can add more competencies if you feel you have a need to. But we're saying everyone, no matter how small, how large, everybody needs to be using these fundamental competencies. You can use these to assess, just like we did with alphas, do you have the right abilities on your team? Helps you ask the right questions. A quick example. This is the words for stakeholder representation competency. We have a whole scenario in there on stakeholder representation. This is one, and this came out earlier in our discussion, where a lot of projects go awry by not picking the right people with the right skills as stakeholder representatives. You often see stakeholders that come in and go, okay, I'm a stakeholder, I'll go to this meeting. And they represent themselves, their own private view. They don't realize, here's the way we've defined this. A competency that encapsulates the ability to gather, communicate, and balance the needs of other stakeholders and accurately represent their views. A lot of people don't have this skill. So this leads you to say, do we have the right stakeholder representatives the people that can represent others' viewpoints. This is a very special skill, and a lot of projects get in trouble by not having the people that go in and represent the group. Okay?
It's a good representative of what usually happens because people will delegate it. I'm going to delegate my responsibility to the, and this explains why that becomes a problem that will lead projects astray.
Yep. What if we can't meet a checklist item? Common question that comes up. Team seated, mechanisms to grow the team in place. Well, I got told we've got 3 people on this project. That's all we're going to get. I can't grow the team. Team needs to decide whether this is important. If you really need to grow, then you have to raise it up as a risk. It might not be a problem. 3 people might be fine. We know we got to do the job. That's it. Check, move on. But you discussed it. Everybody needs to think about how you're going to grow the team for another reason. Even if you've only got 3, what happens if one of them leaves the project? How are you going to get the replacement? So this is the discussion. You need to know how you're going to be successful in your context. Team formed. All team members understand how to perform their work. Again, maybe they don't, but can the team figure out what we're going to do? Can we mentor one of them? Can somebody help with another? All right. If it's a problem, you need to do something, but this will lead you to find the right solution. Stakeholder representative. The stakeholder representatives have agreed to take on their responsibilities. What if one of them doesn't agree to it? What if one says, I won't take on my responsibility? Team says, how important is that stakeholder? If it's really important, you better get another one. If he's not a big stakeholder, move on. Yes, Merwin. Okay, yep. So the answer to this, use context. One more example of how this is a thinking framework. You use it in the context of your project. I'm going to do this quick because I'm going to finish on time. I always time box my lectures. I'm a big Scrum advocate. So this is our scenario 1 from the user's guide. It's a project just kicking off. 3 team members are assigned. The team uses Essence cards in what I call the assessment poker style. Anybody heard of planning poker? Assessment poker, I showed you the cards before. And I think Renee talked about it as part of the agile process. So essentially, and I'm going to just say this real quick, everybody gets a deck of cards on the team, and what you do is the team goes through the 7 the alphas, and each of the team self-assesses what state we think we're in, and then all at the same time, everybody raises the card, and then if we're all in agreement, we move on. If we have a disagreement, we have a discussion. Why do you think you got to this state? Why do you think you got to... It's a great exercise to figure out where you are and where to focus next. And that's what scenario 1 helps you with. It shows you how to use the cards in an assessment way to figure out where you are, an assessment poker way. It's only one way to use the cards. There's other games that you can play with the cards that help teams with various scenarios. Important point here is that how much, once you decide that you have an issue or you have to do something, the team decides how much effort needs to be put into it based on how important it is. So we're not telling you how much. This gets back to the earlier point that I made towards the beginning. Observation. Most interesting things from the discussion, things that we hear that don't seem like a big issue. Many are small things we observe in hindsight that get projects into big trouble. So how do we best help teams addressing these small things? This gets back to my initial point. You know, a lot of the small things are the things that lead to the big things. So first, a lot of these things on these cards are small things. And if there's small things that the team recognizes are big to you, you can even add hints to these cards. You can modify the cards in the sense of putting on it the hints that will help you. That addresses my type 1 type of problem. The type 2 is best addressed by the team discussion. And that's what this framework is all about, is to get the team to talk about the right things, looking for the right balanced solution, not just yes or no. So in summary, the power of the kernel is not that it teaches us anything new, or things experienced people don't already know. In fact, that's what we were doing. We were gathering the knowledge and building this framework from experienced people. Nor is an alternative to what you're doing today. We're not trying to say, don't use Scrum, use this. Rather, it can strengthen and improve your current way of working by helping your team ask the right questions, leading to the deeper discussions needed to determine what is most important to focus on now, giving your team explicit evidence to support them in getting the right focus on the right things now. And in conclusion, I like to think of this as an aid to software engineering critical thinking. In an era, where things are moving fast and we have to think on our feet, this is the framework we think we really need going forward. And that's why it's different from these other mechanisms and why it should work together with them. Almost hit it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions before I say something? Before I ask a couple? Anybody want to go through some? So the only thing I'll say is, and I was really comments, is that, starting with the small problems and kind of keeping up with those, and focus not just on all of them. I agree with you. The whole big data analysis, gathering data can take up so much time, right? How I used to manage was exactly that. You hit, and we talked about statistical, using statistics to kind of go and identify things, because you can never get as much as you want. That's how I used to kind of manage. I'd talk to this team, I'd talk to this team, and I'd make my opinion and go forward. Okay? And sometimes that's the best way, because you went right to grassroots. You got, just like he said, just like Paul said, you got data from small. It probably applies to that 80-20 rule. You're probably going to hit 80, right? Like in the procurement example he gave, right? Probably didn't hit all 100% of the problems, but he hit the 80, made a significant impact. I would also ask you, it's got to be tough being a consultant to go into a company, come in and help us with this, right? And you never know what you're walking into. I hope this works out.
So let me make one comment on that. It gets a lot easier, because usually it takes about 5 minutes, because there aren't that many different patterns out there.
Right. So with that, Paul, thanks.